Ahead tonight, hear the latest on the Baha Mar bankruptcy case.
Coming up in the Bahamas tonight, that Sunwing flight has since departed LPIA for Grand Bahama, but find out why it was diverted here in the first place.
Plus, more condolences being offered for the late Sir Albert Miller. The Bahamas tonight, the National Report starts right now.
Now in HD. ZNS Network presents The Bahamas Tonight. This portion of the news brought to you by BTC Every Day.
It was another long day of legal wranglings for parties embroiled in the Baha Mar bankruptcy dispute. Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Saunders. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, this comes as representatives from the Attorney General's office laid out its case this morning for the appointment of provisional liquidators to oversee the project. Janae Noel Ferguson leads us off tonight from the Supreme Court.
Attorneys representing stakeholders involved in the Baha Mar dispute, that's the Attorney General's office, Baha Mar, China Construction America, China XM Bank, and other creditors, returned to the Supreme Court Wednesday as the government moves to have provisional liquidators appointed who would gain control of the stalled multi-billion-dollar Baha Mar project. Lead attorney from the Attorney General's office, Peter Knox QC, who replaced Minister of State for Legal Affairs Damian Gomez for fear of accusations of conflict of interest, reasoned why the wind-up of the 7 Baha Mar companies is necessary. Knox charged that the companies, through its parent company, Baha Mar Limited, has been unable to pay its debt, which ranges in the millions of dollars, and have had no revenue coming in as the opening date for the resort has been indefinite. The company's debt and expenses are expanding. He highlighted government entities owed, including BC, Water and Sewage, the National Insurance Board, business license fees, and the list goes on. This debt alone, Knox says, has made the company undoubtedly insolvent, meaning that they are unable to pay and its liabilities are in excess of a reasonable market value of assets held. The gaming board, represented by Wayne Monroe QC, has also joined the application in an effort to recoup funds owed. Meanwhile, Baha Mar's legal team, Ian Colbert QC and Maurice Glinton QC, had hoped to have the first application filed by the Attorney General struck out. Knox, however, says that regardless of what application is accepted by Justice Ian Winder, their stance to move ahead with provisional liquidators remains unchanged. Janae Noel Ferguson, ZNS Network News.
The purchase of a property closed for a number of years and projects lined up throughout the country could give the Bahamas the economic boost it needs. Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Perry Christie, shared some of the imminent projects with our Cleopatra Murphy.
After being closed for more than a decade, Prime Minister the Right Honorable Perry Christie has revealed a group has agreed to purchase the South Ocean Resort. The 373-acre property closed its doors in 2004. While the Prime Minister did not share who the party was, Albany, through a joint venture, issued a bid in the past, in addition to principles behind the Nassau Palm Resort renovation.
We are working on that, but at the same time we know we have to solve the problems of the leaking oil at Clifton into the water, a major environmental sort of obstacle to that area of New Providence.
With a number of proposals before government, Christie is predicting a good year leading into the next for the country. He says investors are expressing a renewed interest in purchasing the $4.9 billion Kinser project in West End, Grand Bahama. There is also a proposal for a cruise ship port for the island, with additional investments on tap for Eleuthera and Exuma.
In Exuma, they're finishing the processing of a Swiss-driven development where the developer says she wants to have the best small hotel in the world, and they're doing that on 2 islands that they purchased, Children's Bay Key and Williams Key in Exuma, and they want to have another key to build homes for the employees.
In New Providence, with work to begin on the point in a matter of weeks, Prime Minister Christie says more Bahamians will be employed. With this project, Christie says he requested that the ratio of workers be 70% Bahamian and 30% Chinese. He says most importantly, the pending projects are not isolated to New Providence.
The government of Bahamas has a lot in the mix, and a lot of it happens to be dispersed around the Bahamas. Genting is using 200 now of the 300-room hotel that's being built. They're finishing the lobby and the connection with the casino. But they are going to continue to employ people because they're expanding the product down there in Bimini.
With many potentially positive outcomes in limbo because of delayed approval, the Prime Minister says he has contemplated a task force to spur along the process.
Once they're out and once they're processed, once they're passed and approved, they represent jobs in the country. And that's the most important thing for us, jobs and training.
Cleopatra Murphy, ZNS Network News.
Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Perry Christie, leads the long list of dignitaries offering condolences on the passing of former Grand Bahama Port Authority executive and Grand Bahamas businessman Sir Albert Miller yesterday. Mr. Christie described Sir Albert as an extraordinary Bahamian whose life bore the marks of high distinction, first as a law enforcement officer of legendary courage, intelligence, and integrity, and then in the second part of his life as an iconic Indigenous leader of the growth and development of the city of Freeport. The Prime Minister said Sir Albert was a tough cop from the old school, a policeman of outstanding ability and incorruptibility, a born leader whose personal example inspired successive generations of police recruits. At the time of his retirement, Sir Albert had risen to the post of Deputy Commissioner of Police, destined to become the president of the Grand Bahama Port Authority and a major figure in the civic and business leadership of Freeport. He became the highest-ranking Indigenous Bahamian in the Port Authority, and Sir Albert was enormously influential in helping the port adapt to the changing times and to better understand its larger responsibility for the social and economic development of Grand Bahama. The Prime Minister said Sir Albert was, together with the late Edward St. George and Sir Jack Hayward, an indispensable member of that triumvirate that helped sway for decades over the nation's second city. Sir Albert was also a mentor and trusted advisor to successive governments, including his own, and for which he has a debt of gratitude for his friendship. Sir Albert died at the age of 89. A 186-member charter group from Philadelphia received a stellar Grand Bahama welcome today, but that's only after the Sunwing flight that they were on had to be diverted to the Lynden Pinland International Airport last night. The Transport and Aviation Minister, the Honorable Glennis Hannah Martin, said the dispute was tied to long-standing issues with the air traffic controllers not receiving overtime pay. Jiminita Swain tonight has both sides of the story.
Transport and Aviation Minister Glennis Hannah Martin said that for several weeks there has been an issue between government and the air traffic controllers regarding overtime pay. But it seems the issue reached a boiling point last night when an air traffic controller took a position once he was off.
The Sunwing aircraft was scheduled to come into Freeport, and the officer on duty stated that he was off duty at 10 o'clock. When the aircraft, which was out of Philadelphia carrying 186 passengers, when it was about 15 minutes outside of Freeport, the advice went out to the pilot that no one would be there, shop closed, and as a result, the aircraft had to divert to Nassau with those passengers.
Hannah Martin said the Department of Labor continues to work with the government and the union to resolve the issue.
The Director of Labor is marshalling the dialogue. He's mediating. He's giving his advice on the matter. And there are a number of issues that were being discussed, and this was one of them. I'm sure he gave them certain advice. He gave us certain advice. If out of that process you feel aggrieved or you feel as if the strength of your argument is not being appreciated, you go to another state. This is industrial relations. The law sets out how you litigate disputes.
As to the fate of the employee and the way forward, Hannah Martin explains the next steps.
The matter is under full investigation by the Department of Civil Aviation, and I think they've requested reports. We want to do things in a way, if the government's understanding of the law, which is our advice, that they're entitled to give time off in lieu of pay, which General Orders says specifically in its language. If that does not apply in the case of this essential service, and if we should be doing something different, then if we know that, we will do so.
President of the Air Traffic Controllers Union, LaShawn Gray, said rerouting an aircraft was nothing new.
What I can say is that although the aircraft was en route, the controller was advised that the aircraft would be in there before 10 o'clock. The government of the Bahamas has decided that they would not compensate controllers for overtime, despite them having worked overtime all this time for years. The individuals have no problem with not being paid overtime. It's just that they're not willing to work the overtime. If you're not going to be paid for it, then really the best thing is not to work it. What would be important is that the officer that was responsible put in place the necessary things that would ensure that there would be a smooth and safe transition into the alternate airport of that aircraft.
Hannah Martin said Sunwing would have footed the cost of the overnight stay for its passengers who are now in Grand Bahama. Jiminy DeSwain, ZNS Network News.
In other news, Minister of Financial Services, the Honorable Hope Strawn, responded to the recently released labor force survey, which showed an increase in unemployment in persons in the sector by 36%. Strawn acknowledged this reflects several factors, namely the downsizing, closure, and amalgamation of certain commercial and offshore banks and banking services. The ministry, she said, is looking at Latin America and Asia to push the Bahamas as sector strong and ready for expanded financial services. The minister anticipates these efforts will hopefully recoup some of the employment losses in the industry.
So we have a map out and a plan for how we're going to actually try to see if we can rebuild some of what we've lost and we've gained. And the ultimate goal really is for the Bahamian people to have jobs, and to have jobs in this very important industry where we know that the income that is derived from financial services usually is on the higher end. And so this is how we build what we call our middle income sector. And so the importance of it can be underscored. And so we recognize how important it is, and we're going to be able to actually track now what we're doing, because those statistics actually provide us with a target. So we know now that we have 36% of the financial services industry that we have to now try to see how much of that we could recoup.
Also tonight, Minister of Labor, the Honorable Shane Gibson, says he's shocked over reports that the Atlantis Resort could possibly be considering layoffs as a result of the increase in minimum wage from $150 to $210 a week. The minister said the views of the private sector were communicated through the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce, its representative in the National Tripartite Council, and the amount was agreed to by stakeholders.
For them to take that position now, it was a shock to me. And so I'm going to have to go back now and speak with the Director of Labor and persons on the Tripartite Council to see whether or not when the Chamber of Commerce said they speak for all employers, if they actually speak for all employers, particularly when you look at an employer as large as Atlantis. So hopefully it wouldn't come to that. I mean, I'm concerned about it because obviously you don't want any job losses. And so hopefully, I know these companies like Atlantis, they would usually run on staff that they need. And there are very few companies except government who would hire more persons than are needed to perform various job functions. And so I would be very disappointed if that would happen.
The Labor Minister noted that anytime employers are forced to pay out more, they often say that job losses will be the end result. And as the Atlantis Paradise Island Resort is the country's largest private employer at this time, the minister hopes staff reductions are not in their future plan.
Even when you try to have them pay their electricity bill, so you'll find, I don't think Atlantis is in that category, but you'll find many of the larger developments and resorts, OBEC, lots of monies. And anytime you try to clamp down on them to pay what they owe BEC, the first thing they will say is we have to reduce staff. So anything that would cause them to spend money, they use it as an excuse to reduce staff. I don't think Atlantis would do that. And so hopefully at the end of the day, they will realize that every employee deserves a fair day's pay for a fair day's work.
A most wanted man was shot by police this morning. I'll have the details coming up in the Bahamas tonight.
This portion of the news is brought to you by the new Shell and Leaded, designed for extra miles.